Hey everyone, welcome to Logan Smosh Pig. Glad to have you here. Do me a favor and please subscribe if you haven't already. Listen up, because the time has come for a new episode of Rock and Read. Today we'll pick up where we left off with Chapter 8 of Set the Night on Fire by the lead guitarist of the Doors, Robby Krieger. Now let's check out Chapter 8. I try to make time every day to play at least one of my 1963 Jose Ramirez 3 acoustic guitars. Since 1882, the Ramirez family from Madrid has been making guitars known around the world for their craftsmanship, power, and tone. One of Jose's models can even be found in the collection of the Metropolitan Museum of Art. During my final year at Menlo, my dad was heading to Spain on business, so I begged him to find the Ramirez shop and bring me back a souvenir. My dad came back with not one, but 3 guitars from Jose's shop. 2 flamenco, 1 classical. I don't know how he managed to get them all back to the States while juggling the rest of his luggage, but my appreciation for the depth of that gesture was matched only by my love for how rich the guitars sounded. My dad paid a few $100s for them. They're worth thousands today, but I could never sell them. Good guitars are meant to be played. My dad didn't always embrace my musical hobby so thoughtfully. He originally agreed with the legal advice I was given after my first arrest. Stop hanging around with musicians. When he saw me applying to colleges, he must have thought he had set me on the straight and narrow. But in truth, the only reason I wanted to go to college was so I could major in not joining the Army. By the summer of 1964, JFK was gone. LBJ was gradually sending more and more troops to Vietnam, and I was at a ripe age for the draft. Menlo was a preparatory school for Stanford University, but my grades weren't good enough to get in, so I got my first draft deferment by joining Bill Wolfe at UC Santa Barbara instead. Wolfe had actually been accepted to Stanford, but he chose UCSB because he thought his college days would be better spent surfing and chasing girls than working hard. I couldn't argue with his logic. I took mathematics classes because, well, I had to take something, and I knew it would make my dad happy. Despite my resistance toward Menlo, I was glad I had ended up there, because it exposed me to so much new music. And despite my apathy toward college, I was glad I ended up at UCSB, because it exposed me to a community of musicians. By that point, I was good enough to offer other students guitar lessons, and I took more flamenco classes from fellow student and future famous playwright Frank Chin. The Student Union building always had a guitarist or two jamming in one corner or another, so I'd occasionally join in. I met one of the DJs from the campus radio station, and he invited me to perform in the studio a few times. And there were open mic nights at a dive called the Red Rutabaga in nearby Isla Vista, where I could strap on a harmonica holder, don a work shirt and jeans, and do my best Bob Dylan impression, or where Bill Wolfe and I could play blues covers on guitar, with our friend Bob Cranston accompanying us on a harmonica. Other than Dylan, 2 of my biggest influences at the time were the Paul Butterfield Blues Band and Koerner, Ray, and Glover, so their songs were the ones I covered the most. Paul Butterfield was an electric Chicago blues outfit, and their guitarist Mike Bloomfield had a way of making his guitar sing with a loud sustain that bordered on psychedelic. Koerner, Ray, and Glover played a blend of folk and blues that was surprisingly soulful for a bunch of white boys, and John Koerner played a 7-string guitar with a distinctive jangly sound. Later on, when I joined the Doors, I borrowed Mike Bloomfield's riff from the song Mellow Down Easy for Break On Through, and I even more shamelessly borrowed a riff from an obscure John Kalerner song called Southbound Train for Love Me Two Times. Years later, I met John Kalerner and pointed out the similarity between our riffs, but he said he hadn't noticed, so I guess I stole it the right way. Folk, blues, flamenco, jug bands, never rock and roll though. It was too simple, too easy. Sure, I loved Elvis as a boy, and before that I used to ride my bike to the Santa Monica Boys Club and plunk nickel after nickel into the jukebox to listen to Rock Around the Clock. In junior high, I was even the president of our school's Little Richard fan club, but by the time the early Beatles and Beach Boys stuff popped up, I had become a snob. My musical education at Menlo and UCSB had me turning up my nose at the electric guitar. That all changed on the night of February 26, 1965. Chuck Berry was headlining a show called Blues 65 at the Santa Monica Civic Auditorium, and Wolf convinced me to go. I only agreed because Delta Blues legend Skip James was on the bill, along with the Chambers Brothers and Big Mama Thornton. I had heard some of Chuck's songs, and they were fine. They just didn't excite me. But when he took the stage, those songs took on a new dimension. Part of it was probably due to the Acapulco Gold we were smoking, but part of it was the undeniable magic of 1965 Chuck Berry. This was before the days when he turned cynical and punched a clock on stage. This was the duck-walking, fast-talking Chuck Berry who inspired so many other rock guitarists before me. The energy he had, the excitement he generated in the crowd, it all seemed to stem from something most of my folk, blues, flamenco, and jug band heroes lacked: a Gibson ES-335 electric guitar. The next day, I took my first Mexican acoustic guitar down to the Ace Loans pawn shop in Santa Monica to trade it in for a cherry red Gibson ES-335. That's what Chuck used, so that's what I would be using from then on. But it was way out of my price range. The pawn shop guy offered me the entry-level Gibson SG Special instead. I didn't want to leave empty-handed. At least it was a Gibson, and at least it was red. The act of literally trading acoustic for electric was a major turning point in my life, but the months that followed held two more turning points that were equally significant. The first was trying psychedelics for the first time. The second was reconnecting with my old high school friend, John Dinsmore. John was a year ahead of me at University High School when I was a freshman, so I didn't know him all that well. Then I transferred to Palisades High School in my sophomore year, and Menlo after that. But John and I were connected through a mutual friend named Bob Brunner, who was in my class at uni, and in the school jazz band with John. Another mutual friend, Grant Johnson, who would later go on to record with Gene Vincent and Jackson Brown, was a brilliant keyboard player who had been raised on music lessons from his mom, a professional cellist. Grant's mom's friends were all top-notch jazz players, and they would gather at Grant's house to jam. John and I got to know each other from hanging out at Grant's house and marveling at all the musical skill on display, but our one-year age gap kept us from growing too close, and he was way more into jazz than I was. I never envisioned us playing in a band together. I don't remember how John and I ended up running into each other again when I was home from UCSB, but he and I and Bob and Grant and Wolf formed a small circle of friends who would get stoned in frequent jazz clubs around LA. We spent quite a few nights at Dante's in North Hollywood, or Shelley's Manhole, owned by drummer Shelley Mann, and we saw greats like Mingus, Wes Montgomery, and Rashawn Roland Kirk, a blind multi-instrumentalist who played 3 saxophones at once. It wasn't long before Grant suggested we start our own band, the Psychedelic Rangers. Bob played bass, Grant played piano, John obviously played drums, and Wolf and I played guitar. It's kind of a stretch to call it a band. It was really just an excuse to jam and drop acid. We never played any gigs, and the only song we had was called Paranoia, which was written by Grant and based on my fear of being busted for dope after my previous arrests. You walk out the door and you turn out the lights. Your hands are twitching and your head feels light. Oh, the lights on that car seem a little too bright, don't they? Your eyes are red and your skin is white, and that black and white fever has got you uptight. Paranoia! In the summer of '65, Wolf and I decided we'd ditch UCSB and enroll at UCLA instead. I felt like I had already gotten everything I could out of the Santa Barbara music scene. So much more was happening in LA, and math is math. Did it really matter where I was taking those classes? Wolf and I ended up playing guitar in another band, The Clouds, which was a return to our folk roots. The brains of the operation was singer-guitarist and occasional Leave It to Beaver actor David Kent, who wrote all our songs and copied Bob Dylan much more successfully than I did. David was older than me and Wolf, so he tended to boss us around, but he was actually a pretty talented songwriter. The only lyrics I remember, though, were from a song called Praying Mantis Mother, which went something like, "Oh, you praying mantis mother, with your wings of silver silk, trying to feed your babies, but you used up all your milk." The Clouds recorded a few songs at Gold Star Studios in Hollywood, just like Ritchie Valens, the Ronettes, and the Righteous Brothers before us, and the Beach Boys, the Ramones, and Charles Manson after us. But our demo never attracted any interest from labels, and I don't think we ever even played a gig. Meanwhile, John had joined the Doors and was recruiting Wolf and me to audition for their vacant guitar slot. The Clouds, as clouds always do, slowly dissipated. Once I joined the Doors, it became harder and harder to pretend to care about college. I was taking psychology classes, but had no intention of ever becoming a psychologist. I was taking calculus classes, but had no intention of ever becoming a person who gets paid to do calculus. The only thing I paid attention to was my Indian music class, because I intended to be a musician. After I had skipped out on almost an entire semester of calculus, the professor said he would have to fail me for lack of attendance. I pleaded and bargained with him and got him to agree that if I got at least an A- on the final exam, he would give me a C for the semester. For 2 days straight, I stayed up studying on methadone, a then legal version of crank in the form of easy-to-swallow tablets, and I aced that test. Soon after, though, I got my second draft deferment, and UCLA never heard from me again. I never told my parents that I'd dropped out, but by the time they figured it out, the Doors had a gold record, so they didn't make much of a fuss. As I navigated the path from aimless mathematics major to professional musician, the red Gibson SG Special I had bought at Ace Loans was always by my side. It's the guitar I used in my very first band, the guitar that got me into the Doors, the guitar I used at all our early live shows, the guitar that helped me write Light My Fire, and the guitar I played on most of the songs on the first 2 Doors albums. It helped set me on the course my life was meant to take. It was stolen from the Doors office a few years later. There are no distinctive markings on it, so it would be impossible to track it down or even recognize it. And why would I ever write down the serial number from a cheap pawn shop guitar? If it's still out there somewhere, I'm sure the person who has it has no clue that they're in possession of one of the most significant artifacts of my entire life. But I've honestly never really lamented its loss beyond the minor hassle of going out and buying another SG. It served its purpose. The object doesn't matter. The music does. I just hope whoever has it still plays it from time to time. Well, that's the end of Chapter 8. Let me know what you thought of this chapter in the comments below. That does it for today's video, guys. I hope you enjoyed. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already. I really appreciate the support. I'll see you next time. Till then, rock on.